Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this hearing. And obviously, the federal workforce plays a critical and important role in the functioning of our government. It's one of the areas that, honestly, we've been able to work in a bipartisan manner, and that's not normally the way that you would see this particular issue. But you and I both agree that the federal workforce and the way that we go about attracting new talent needs to be reformed. And for the past 2 decades almost, the GAO has warned us about the skills gap and what's going to happen. And they've been sounding the alarm and saying, you know, you need to do something about it. And sadly, we've done nothing. And by nothing, we still have a 40-year-old civil service act that needs reform. The way that we attract new talent is critical. But it's not just, excuse me, on these critical fields that need to be addressed through STEM careers. It's really across the board. You know, in this new day of attracting young talent, the grayer I get, the more I realize the workforce, the way that it was when I went to work, is changing. And so we have to adapt to that. And the federal workforce, sadly, is I've got a statistic here that says only 6.1% of the federal workers are under the age of 30. And to me, when you're attracting talent, you want to go out and get the brightest and the best. And I know that as when my kids were going to college and on to law school, it was not necessarily saying you need to go to work for the federal government. In fact, the federal government didn't even make the top 5 in terms of priority. So we need to work together on that. As we look at this, the National Commission on the Military, National, and Public Service has warned that, quote, many agencies at all levels of government lack effective systems to hire students and recent graduates, close quote. And sometimes it's just making sure that those students know that there's an opportunity, one, but they're wanted is the second part of that. We will lose out so many times because recruiters will go in, especially in an environment when the unemployment is as low as it is. It is a very difficult and challenging time. You know, it takes 106 days, an average of 106 days to hire a federal employee. I mean, listen, we've got to do better than that. And I can tell you, and that's not just with the background checks. That's not with the security clearances. And because what we do is a lot of times we'll give them a temporary clearance so that they can come in. And if we calculated that in until the point where they're at full steam, it would be even more problematic. One of the areas that's been a pet peeve for me on this committee that the chairman and I have agreed on is really looking at the federal employee viewpoint survey and using that as a benchmark in terms of what happens, how it should happen, and to deal effectively with underperforming employees. And when you look at the demotivating factor of employees who feel like that they're not getting recognized, their input doesn't matter, the promotions are not based on merit, that it's all in who you know or who you happen to be associated with, we've got to change that. Now, it will require a leap of faith, in a bipartisan leap of faith to do that, because if you break anything that is 40 years old, there's always say, well, I love the way that it was, but. And so I think that we are committed. I don't want to speak for the chairman, but I know in the privacy of our conversations, working hand in hand to actually make a difference, to make sure that the federal workforce is not only the best, but the best recognized, the best financially rewarded, and ultimately where it becomes a path that makes the top 10 instead of the bottom 10 in terms of priority and going to work there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank my friend.